Hello there. My name is Anonymous. I'm a historian at a museum. Today we're going to look at what happened when the lights went out. That's coming up. It's 1965, and for the past 3 years, the world has been holding its breath. The Cold War is in full swing, and people are worried about a nuclear attack. You might have heard of this thing called mutually assured destruction. This idea that if one side used nuclear weapons, then both sides would be destroyed. So no side actually did anything because they would just kill each other. But this also led to everyone just being kind of stressed out all the time. And so it was with some relief that people around the world learned that after 3 years of tense negotiations, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union had come together to sign a treaty to ban countries from detonating their nuclear weapons in the atmosphere or in outer space or underwater. This was a good thing, right? Well, yeah, it's not like any country wanted to blow itself up after all. But while people hoped that this treaty would reduce the overall number of nuclear tests, many were still concerned. After all, how many times had superpowers put aside their differences before only to go back to war? Yes, this treaty was nice, but would it last? In the midst of these concerns, a small group of American scientists sat down to write a paper, detailing how one superpower could unilaterally stop another from conducting a nuclear test, and their solution was deceptively simple. They would turn off the lights. It sounds silly, doesn't it? How could turning off the lights prevent a country from testing a nuclear bomb? But these scientists believed they had a solution that was simple, effective, and above all, safe. You see, countries conduct nuclear tests by driving a large truck full of explosives to a remote location, usually in the desert or on an atoll in the Indian Ocean, and then parking it next to a tower with a nuclear device on top. Then when everything was ready, someone would drive away in a commandeered Ford Thunderbird or some other flashy car, and then boom, a massive explosion lit up the night sky. But if you didn't want the country to do this, well, you needed to stop them from seeing what was happening. And so the scientists put forward a plan for a system of satellites which would block radio signals coming from anywhere near a nuclear test. And if a test was detected, the United States would send a rocket up into space, carrying a nuclear-powered X-ray telescope that would block out the light coming from the test. By doing this, the satellite system would alert U.S. military forces to the fact that a test had begun, and the X-ray telescope would ensure that no one on Earth could see the flash of light, rendering the test inconclusive. The countries that tried to conduct it would have no idea if they'd succeeded or failed, and over time, they'd get discouraged and just stop. It sounds crazy, right? Why would you send an X-ray telescope into space to block out a nuclear test? Well, because it was easier than stopping the countries from building their bombs. For decades, the United States had conducted its nuclear tests in the Nevada desert at a place called the National Security Test Site, now known as the Nevada Test Site. And while the U.S. government worked hard to keep people far away from the tests, that wasn't always possible. During the first atomic bomb test in 1945, for example, the small town of Rachel, Nevada, was just 8 kilometers from ground zero, and many of its residents could clearly see the mushroom cloud rising over the desert. Other tests throughout the years forced nearby ranchers to abandon their land for weeks after the fallout made it unsafe to live there. The U.S. government even had to pay out millions of dollars to farmers whose crops were ruined after being exposed to nuclear fallout. The U.S. eventually moved its nuclear tests to remote Pacific islands, where there was more room and fewer people. But this wasn't perfect either. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. conducted 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. Some were small, but others unleashed destructive power that could be felt hundreds of kilometers away. In 1954, for example, the United States conducted a massive nuclear test codenamed Castle Bravo, which was designed to simulate the effects of a thermonuclear weapon detonated in the upper atmosphere. The device was placed on top of a tower 274 meters high, the largest tower ever built for a nuclear test. When the bomb exploded, it unleashed a fireball nearly 3 kilometers wide and shot debris more than 120 kilometers into the atmosphere. The explosion was 1,500 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and the mushroom. Cloud rose 37 kilometers into the sky, making it the largest cloud ever created by a nuclear detonation. Castle Bravo sent a shockwave across the lagoon that measured 7 on the Richter scale and killed 234 people on nearby islands who were exposed to lethal doses of radiation. People who lived on other Pacific islands, thousands of kilometers away, found dead fish washing up on shore, swept up by radioactive fallout. Clearly, the United States could not keep people away from every nuclear test, especially if a hostile country decided to launch one. If a country like China or the USSR chose to detonate a nuke, American radar would detect it within seconds, and military planners would have to make incredibly difficult decisions about how to respond. In fact, the Soviets were already planning to do exactly this, stealing a U.S. thermonuclear device, planting it in the mountains of Siberia, and detonating it to demonstrate their ability to end the USS monopoly on nuclear weapons. So if there was any way to prevent countries from testing nuclear weapons, it was worth considering. As the Cold War dragged on, the idea of blocking out a nuclear test began to take shape. At first, scientists considered using missiles to intercept the light from the explosion, but these were expensive, slow, and not very precise. Other proposals involved dropping long sheets of metal into the path of the light, but these required planes flying at incredible speeds and altitudes to work. Others suggested using balloons filled with black ink to block out the light, but these too were dangerous since they relied on winds that could not be predicted. But then, in 1961, an engineer named Philip J. McCloskey came up with an alternative. What if instead of trying to stop the light, they used the atmosphere to do it for them? Years earlier, astronomers had discovered that the Earth's atmosphere acted like a lens, bending the path of light. Normally this was a nuisance, distorting the view of stars, but it could also be used to an advantage. McHenry suggested placing 2 mirrors in the path of a nuclear blast, one on the ground and one in the upper atmosphere, which could be reached with a rocket. These mirrors would reflect the light from the explosion away from the observer, effectively blocking the test. This was the beginning of Project Sunshine. While the concept was relatively simple, putting it into practice proved to be much more difficult. To begin with, the mirrors needed to be absolutely precise. Any imperfections in the surface would ruin the effect. Also, the mirrors needed to be perfectly positioned. A slight miscalculation could result in the mirror simply reflecting the light directly onto the target. There was also the risk that the atmosphere could distort the light, ruining the effect. And finally, the entire thing depended on speed. If the mirrors were deployed too late, they wouldn't be able to block the light, and the test would continue unabated. Nevertheless, the Air Force quickly got to work, enlisting companies across the United States to help them design, build, and launch the necessary equipment. First, they needed a way to deliver the mirrors into the upper atmosphere. Their solution was to use a rocket powered by a nuclear engine, which could reach the upper atmosphere in just mylar across its length, creating a 9-meter diameter concave mirror. This mirror would focus the reflected light onto a secondary mirror positioned on the ground, which would direct it away from observers. Everything was ready. All that was left to do was wait. On July 1962, the United States launched the first rocket of Project Sunshine into the upper atmosphere. On board was a 9-meter diameter mirror designed to reflect the light of a nuclear explosion away from observers on the ground. For a few moments, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then suddenly, just as the mirror was about to deploy, a problem was detected and the self-destruct was triggered. The rocket plunged toward the Earth and exploded, sending tons of debris hurtling toward the small town of Briggs, Texas. Houses and cars were destroyed, windows were shattered, and 5 people were killed. After a year of working through countless technical problems, redesigning equipment and launching test rockets, the Air Force was ready to try again. In June 1963, they launched the second nuclear-powered rocket into the sky, carrying with it the most sophisticated piece of equipment ever placed in the upper atmosphere. It was time to find out if the concept really worked. On July, the Air Force launched a nuclear device in the Nevada desert, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. The nuclear rocket carrying the mirror blasted off into the sky, reaching the upper atmosphere in less than 45 minutes. The mirror unfurled and rotated into position, and the secondary mirror on the ground was moved into place. Then the moment of truth, the light from the explosion hit the mirror in the upper atmosphere and was reflected away from the test site, creating a clear night sky once again. It worked. The United States had successfully blocked the light of a nuclear explosion. And so it was that for the next decade, the United States had the ability to block out nuclear explosions from anywhere in the world. But why haven't you heard of this before? Well, that's because it never happened. Despite the success of the test, the project was quietly canceled in 1970. Over the years, several reasons were given for ending the project. It was too expensive, the technology wasn't reliable enough, and there were too many risks involved. But some experts believe that the real reason was that the US didn't want to provoke the Soviets, who were also developing their own anti-satellite weapons. And maybe they were right. Maybe the cancellation of Project Sunshine saved countless lives. Or maybe it was just another Cold War boondoggle that nobody cared about. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'm a historian at a museum. I'd like to thank our partners whose support makes videos like this possible. And remember, if you want to learn more about the incredible stories from the world of nuclear history, subscribe to our channel.